What's up, guys? If you remember last week, we did 1990, the classic Total Recall starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. There was a remake to that movie from 2012 that nobody ever talks about. And luckily, one of my patrons wants me to review it, and I'm going to do that. So anyway, let's do the 2012 remake of Total Recall. Hear me out. Total Recall stars Colin, Farrell, Kate Beckinsale, Jessica Biel, Bryan Cranston, and is directed by Len Wiseman. What's up, guys? It's time for another patron request review. My patrons always give me interesting movies that I would never even think about reviewing, even though I might have seen some of them. I remember this movie, Total Recall from 2012. First off, there were so many remakes coming out, not just horror, but action movies. And I actually did a Hear Me Out for the RoboCop remake. I don't hate that movie. And anytime I want to defend a movie, not necessarily meaning I'm like over the moon for it, but if I don't think it's that bad, then I'll do a Hear Me Out on it. And you know what?
How did he get activated?
Chappie wanted me to watch the director's cut of this movie, and the last time I saw this was when it first came out, and it might have been one of those bootleg copies because I was actually deployed at the time when it came out in Afghanistan. Anytime you watch one of the, I watched the Avengers on a bootleg, and oh my God, I cried throughout that whole thing. I watched this one, and I didn't remember much of it, you know. So I'm glad he asked me to review this. He even sent me the Blu-ray with the director's cut on it, and it looks gorgeous on my new 65-inch, by the way. And I did do a little homework on the differences between the director's cut because I'm not going to watch both the theatrical and the director's cut. I just don't have that time. But I did watch the director's cut, and I did look up what the differences were. And I'd say there's one big scene that should have been in the theatrical cut from what I read, and we'll get to that scene. But first off, let's give you a quick plot synopsis. This is based off Philip K. Dick's book of the same name. The story, the backbone is pretty much the same. Douglas Quaid lives a normal life. This is in the distant future. He's sick of the same old, in and out, rinse and repeat, clock in, clock out lifestyle. He needs some excitement in his life, and so what does he do? He goes to Recall, and he wants to implant some new memories in there. Could be a vacation, could be a fictional story. In this case, he wants to be a spy, and that's what he does. If you remember, I'm being redundant here because I pretty much gave you the same plot synopsis for the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but these movies pretty much veer off in completely different directions, tone-wise, visually, outside of that plot synopsis. Even some story liberties are taken in the remake that are not ventured in the original. I think that is to this movie's benefit. I'll even say this. It's different in almost every way, down to the actors. Colin Farrell is no Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I don't mean that in a bad way at all. As a matter of fact, in the book, I believe he's supposed to look more like an everyman. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, he just looks larger than life. But I couldn't help but kind of compare this to like what Robert Patrick did as the T-1000 in Terminator 2. When that movie came out, you didn't want to hire another bodybuilder to go against Arnold Schwarzenegger. No, they went with the more sleek, thin type killer, you know, quick. And that's pretty much what Colin Farrell is in this. Once he becomes the spy version of himself, he's quicker in his movements. He doesn't stick out as much as Arnold does. You know, he presents his own flavor. Now, when he gets to Recall, there's a big difference here too, because if you remember in the original, Quaid, he freaks out before the process is complete. Whereas in this one, it's the staff that actually freak out. They inject him in the arm, and he's ready to go bye-bye and go on his excursion, and then they freak out and they say, you know, you lied to us on the test. Now everything is compromised. And from that moment on, he is Hauser. You know, he is the agent. Also, the locations are a little different as they are laid out in this movie. You got this this transport called the Fall, which is how the workers get to work, and they go to this place called the Colony, which originally it was going to be called New Asia. And you can see why they were going to call it that, because it just looks like a dark, rainy, seedy, almost Blade Runner-esque Asian look type establishment. You see streetwalkers, you see prostitutes, you see hustlers, but everything is just beautifully laid out. And it looks like a completely different world than the original. In the original, they do go to Mars, like halfway through the movie. But in this one, they pretty much stay in the vicinity of the colony and then also the United Federation of Britain. Of course, they do have to have the three-breasted woman. She shows up. Now, she shows up before he actually enters recall, whereas in the original, she shows up later in the movie. Man, I don't know if that was CGI, but damn good job. Damn good job. Now, I definitely got to talk about Kate Beckinsale. If you remember, Sharon Stone played Laurie in the last one. And then you had Michael Ironside playing this character, Richter. Laurie in this movie is played by Kate Beckinsale, and you are going to see a lot more of her throughout this movie, pretty much from the get-go. And she is a combination of those two characters because there is no Richter in this movie. And Cohagen is played by Bryan Cranston. You will definitely notice the wig on him because he was doing Breaking Bad at the time. But it doesn't like take you out of the movie or anything. Plus, Bryan Cranston doesn't show up until like 90 minutes into the movie. But when he gets home to Laurie, it's pretty much the same beat for beat, and I much prefer the Sharon Stone version of that scene. I just don't buy the chemistry between Laurie and Quaid in this movie as much as I did in the original. But the action scenes are great. If you are a big fan of Kate Beckinsale and her action stuff, especially like Underworld, even though the story here is completely different, then you're definitely going to have a good time with this. Kate Beckinsale does a really great job at action. She has great stunt doubles that work with her, and she is, in constant movement throughout this movie. When you go into the Total Recall remake, I think a lot of people, they want to compare it to the original. I don't really know what they want, honestly. And it could have been absolutely atrocious and horrible like most remakes are. Or at least a good portion of them are, especially when you step outside of horror. We can have fun with horror remakes, but a lot of action remakes are pretty bad. I chose to just ignore the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, which is better, which I enjoy the hell out of, and it's Paul Verhoeven. But I'm a fan of Len Wiseman. I love his take on action. I love what he did with like Die Hard 4. This guy knows how to direct action, and I think Total Recall was the perfect vehicle for that. And I love that he chose to not copy the original and go out of his way to not copy the original, changing up the story even. This is really a popcorn movie. That's what this is. It's spaced out perfectly. There's tons of great action scenes. I love the freeway chase. All the cars are flying cars. I read one fact that the sets in this movie, because they look massive, they spent $10,000 a week on wood screws. And me as a carpenter myself, I was just floored by that. And it really just gave me an insight on how big some of these movie projects are, from a carpenter standpoint. Because without carpenters on movie sets, it just doesn't happen, right? And nobody ever talks about the people that build these sets. 10,000 screws in a week. Jesus, that's a massive set, but it looks gorgeous. It really looks gorgeous. And I'm a huge fan of Blade Runner. I just watched Blade Runner again, the original, a few nights ago. And man, talk about a movie that's just intoxicating. So to go from that and then to watch this, you kind of get the same vibe. Now, one thing I do prefer about this movie is how they handle Hauser and Quaid being the same person. In the director's cut, which is the only version I would recommend you guys watch, Ethan Hawke plays Hauser. And you get to see that Cohagen knew him with that face, and then he changes his face eventually to the face of Colin Farrell. And I guess things just make sense more when you have a different actor playing the other side of a character. And this movie really plays around with that idea, that notion that, a split personality almost. The former version of yourself was just not a good guy, a complete dick. Whereas the post, let's call it like amnesia, even though it's not really amnesia, you are a completely different person. And there have been quite a few movies that are about this idea. There was a movie with Richard Gere and Jodie Foster where he played a guy who stole the identity of somebody else because he looked exactly like him. I'll put like the poster for it here because I can't remember the name of it right now. Great movie, actually. Came out in the 90s. You know, it just explores that idea. The same face, two completely different personalities. Also, Melina is played by Jessica Biel, and I really loved Jessica Biel as Melina in this. They really focus more on the love story. At the beginning of the movie, he's having these dreams about her. And those dreams are basically what his life was before he became Quaid. And they are still in his head. And so he was in love with Melina. And the original doesn't really focus on that as much as it does in this one. And I do think it worked quite well here. I think Jessica Biel and Colin Farrell, they had great chemistry together. Now, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is not even an action scene. I like the Mexican standoff scene between Doug, who is Quaid's best friend, and he's trying to get Quaid to shoot Melina. He's trying to tell him that I have been implanted in your memory now because this isn't real. None of this is real. And the scene plays out a bit long, and I don't know if in the original cut, maybe it was tapered down just a little bit, but it was quite effective. But the movie does offer little clues along the way to help you differentiate between reality and fantasy. And I would say even more than the original does. Now, as far as any cons, for a director's cut, I would have liked a little bit more blood in the movie. But, you know, that's just a minor gripe. I do think the amount of action does make up for it. It does pause enough to focus on some character beats and some story beats, which is nice. But man, I was quite surprised by how much I did enjoy this remake. And I think, again, you just have to ignore the Paul Verhoeven aspect of the original because Paul Verhoeven, one of my favorite directors, and you're not going to get that with this movie. And it's sort of like what I was talking about with the RoboCop remake, another Paul Verhoeven movie. I guess the bottom line here is don't remake Paul Verhoeven movies. Because there are high expectations of your audience if you're covering that ground. But Len Wiseman had the balls to do it because he loves the story by Philip K. Dick so much that he said, hey, I'm going to do my own take on it. So I think that's what you got to do is just say, hey, what would Christopher Nolan's take be on Total Recall? You know, what would Steven Spielberg? You get what I'm saying? So look at it from that angle and you might enjoy it quite a bit more. This movie doesn't try to copy the original at all. You know what? I'm going to give this, I've pondered back and forth, but you know what? I'll give it a low purchase worthy. I think it's worth buying and having in your collection. You know, especially if you're a Len Wiseman fan who's great with action, then I think you'd have a really good time with this movie. So thank you, Chappie, for sending this to me. I'm glad I have it in my collection now, and I'll probably watch it again down the line. So yeah. As a matter of fact, I think this would be a good companion to the RoboCop remake. If you want to watch like a double feature, remake double feature, I think both those would go quite well together. I know that's controversial. I know a lot of you hate the RoboCop remake, but I didn't think it was as bad as some people make it out to be. So yeah. So let me know your thoughts on the Total Recall remake in the comments. I'm looking forward to hearing them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day. And on Fridays, we do Free for Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Become a channel member. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Drumdum out.